Witchy and Weird podcast.
Hello, witchy and weird people. I am here for another solo episode, and I was thinking to myself, usually I have like tons of ideas for episodes I want to do, and I was kind of like, what should I say? And then I was intuitively drawn to my Lemurian Quartz crystal, and I decided I was going to meditate with it and see what it wanted to share with you all. So in case you've never heard of a Lemurian quartz crystal, they basically have these like bands on the side of them, and they're supposed to be like kind of like information that's stored in it, and you can rub your Lemurian quartz crystal towards the tip and it will turn it on and activate it, and then you can like glean the information that's stored in this crystal. And yes, it does have to do with Lemuria and the Lemurian race or aliens, however you think about them. So it's like tapping into their knowledge, which is also like I think I'm gonna do an episode on aliens soon, but I love working with aliens over deities, so that's where I'm at. But before we dive in, I just wanted to talk about the patron tiers and what it is, what it looks like, because there were some changes that I made recently. So there's 3 current tiers if you do want to become a patron. It basically helps support me so that I can keep making more episodes. And if we get a certain amount of patrons, then I can get rid of the ads because the ads are helping make me money so that I can keep doing this. But, anyways, the first tier is Baby Witch. And that one, you get access to exclusive patron posts and episodes. So I put out one, I think it's 2. I'm going to step it up to 2. Yeah, that's what I put for the new one. 2 episodes that are exclusive for patrons every month. When I start doing like shows and things, you would get early ticket access. You get a shout out on the podcast. And then the next tier, you get everything in the first tier, and that one is called the Rising Witch. And in that one, you get 15% off all merch, which I created some merch. I'm just finding the right place to sell it. I think it'll be through our Patreon page. And then you'll get a monthly shadow work prompt that is intuitively downloaded for me, and it'll be a PDF, and you can have access to that. And then the last tier is Coven Creator, and that one you get everything in the other 2. And then I'll be doing monthly group spells that kind of coincide with the shadow work prompts. So you'll just get like that extra boost because I'll be doing spells for a spell for everybody to help them with the theme of the month, and all that will be communicated in the Patreon like platform. You can like make posts and messages and stuff. So the price for Baby Witch is $5 a month. Rising Witch will be $11 a month, and Coven Creator is $22. So if you're interested in supporting me and supporting the podcast, I would greatly appreciate it. And if you have any other ways that you would love to interact with me through Patreon, like please let me know. I'm open to suggestions. Like I said, I kind of changed it already based off of how the vibe was going. But I'm just really excited for that opportunity. And I really want to make merch like a thing that like everybody can buy. It's not going to be only for patrons, but I'm really excited to do that because I love creating art. But I forgot to mention, in the Coven Creator you get 20% off merch, and in Rising Witch you get 15% off merch. So good discounts. Anyways, so let's get back to the episode. So what came through when I was meditating with my Lemurian Quartz was very interesting. So I'm just gonna kind of like tell it as the story as it unfolded. So basically, I sat down and I got ready for meditation. I was holding it up to my third eye, the Lemurian Quartz that I have. And I basically asked, what topic should I share with the masses? And then I found myself immediately like correcting my word choice for my question, because I felt like I needed to be like softer and nicer, that the term like the masses was like very like, I don't know, it just felt like negative to me. And I changed my question to be, what should I share with my beautiful and loving community? And this, I don't know if this happens to you, but this happens to me often where I say something in my head or out loud, and then I find myself correcting my natural word choice or tone because I want to be perceived as a different way. And the Lemurian Quartz immediately picked up on this and was like, you don't have to like change who you are and water yourself down to be more palatable. And they like showed me that this is definitely a program, right, that I'm running, but they specifically pointed out that it came from like the online spiritual community, or like the love and light new age spiritual community. Um that I said that word, and then I was like, oh my god, like people are, that's rude, like people, I need to focus on like the beautiful and loving community that I do have. And they were saying like, if that's your authentic self, like if you want to say like, what should I share with the masses, with like this very like potent and powerful like villain energy, then do that, be that, like be who you are. And so they kind of pointed out like different ways that we might fall prey to these like really small examples and programs of watering ourselves down, like pick your poison, right? Is it watering yourself down, turning yourself like all the way up because people say you're too shy, or like there's so many different ways that we learn from our surroundings how we should be, instead of having surroundings that inspire us and make us feel safe and support us to be who we actually are, right? To celebrate our uniqueness. So that was something that they really pointed out, and I think that it's really important because we do most of us do shadow work who listen to this, right? And we are working on healing our trauma and our programming. That's like a huge thing on this podcast. But sometimes we overlook like the smaller ways in which we create a space to modify our authenticity, right? So, what I mean by this is like, yeah, we can see large memories, big triggering moments in our life that have shown us that we can't be the way that we are. But usually, when we're talking about practicing any kind of craft, we usually say, like, start small, right? Like, practice every day a little bit. Like, just keep going until it gets better. And even when I'm talking with my clients, and probably I've said it on the podcast before, like when we're training our intuition, when we're unlearning things, we start with like smaller, like learning how to trust your intuition. You start with smaller things that make it easier to build that memory in your body, that response in your muscles, the like new synapse path in your brain to how you can do this, so that when it comes to bigger things, we feel like, oh, I've done this before. This feels like safer territory, like instead of just going from 0 to 60, right? So these smaller ways that I, even in my own head, when I'm meditating, I'm not even speaking to anybody, but I'm already like censoring myself essentially. That kind of shows the larger issue of, not being okay with who I actually am and feeling like I'm too evil, I'm too villainesque, I'm too much, I'm too intimidating, whatever it is, right? And in these smaller moments that it can show, like if we slow down to really think about these smaller things, it can show us so much about ourselves. Because once I saw that, I saw how this pattern is perpetuated in many different aspects of my life, and how throughout my life I've heard and been told from many different people and society and other things that I can't be me, right? In so many different ways. But I think that it was just something for that I needed, and obviously like to be shared with you all, that these smaller things deserve our attention, and they deserve that space to look at critically, and maybe just even observe, non-judgmentally, so that we can make those, when we make those smaller changes, it's going to add up to bigger changes, right? So now if I'm committing to being authentic and not changing my words, then I'm going to feel better when I post things, when I say things, when I write things. And even in my head, like I'm going to feel like even my head is a safe space for myself that's not being censored. And that will help me to, add up to the larger thing of being safe to be exactly who I am and to be authentic. So I really wanted to point that out, to think about like ways in which society and specifically the spiritual community has shown us like you can't be who you are. And, like unfortunately, if you're like a female bodied person, you you've grown up, you're to this, to be to, like be softer, be more feminine, be this. And like if you're a male bodied person, when you were growing up, like you're probably conditioned like, oh, like don't be emotional, don't be this, like toughen up. So there's definitely like regular societal conditioning around this. And like me as a person, I have tons of fire energy. So I'm a very blunt person, and I come in and people are like, "Oh, you're intimidating, you're too loud, you talk too much." Like that, like my point of view often gets mistaken for being mean or rude, just because I'm not afraid to say the thing that I know will lead to the most change for that person, or will point out, I'm not going to sit here and sugarcoat it for you. So there's tons of different ways about like who I am that I started to see like, oh my goodness, like this over time, like I've seen that I've changed this. And then coming into the spiritual community, especially being a leader in that community, I definitely have, we all want to be liked, we all want to be taken seriously, and all that stuff. So it's like that fear of like, if I show up who I actually am, then like will people accept me or will they reject me? And I think that this is where like this idea of the villain kind of came in. And I want to spend the rest of the episode like talking about like what we can learn from being perceived as the villain. And when I say villain, I'm mostly referring to like comic books or like cartoon movies or like media and things. Definitely not like the government and politics, but some of these things can be applicable in those spaces. So I basically, I'm going to take a step back. Basically, what I'm saying is, what can we learn from being perceived as a villain? First of all, thinking about what your definition of a villain is, right? And that's why I defined it by saying, like, I'm talking more about like cartoons, comic books, movies, and things like that. Like, especially like I'm feeling more like superhero vibes or like Disney cartoons and things like that, because in my opinion, they're more boiled down to be more pure in terms of like they only have one intention. We clearly know what that is, and we clearly see how they react. They're like the what is the term? They're like the most exaggerated version of these like personality traits and things like that. So it's easier to analyze them. Um, they're not as like fully well-rounded as, like regular human, real human people are. So it's a little bit easier to point out these things. So in terms of being the villain, the first thing that came up when I was talking with my Lemurian Quartz crystal was that there's this idea of balance of yin and yang energies. We've talked about this many times on the podcast. If you've listened to the Patron exclusive episode, I have like a whole podcast about like light and dark, feminine, masculine, yin and yang, right? So the way that they showed it to me was like the villain is that balance. It can be hero and villain, right? Like the struggle between good and evil. And I don't really believe in like good and evil. So that's why I like this metaphor for like hero and villain, because it's not really that the villain is evil or bad in what I'm referring to and what we're going to be talking about. It's more so that it's like the balance of push and pull of energy that is needed for balance, right? So if we have too much of the hero, I guess like you'll kind of see what I'm talking about in terms of this example. Most times when we see in movies and comics, the hero is motivated by something, right? The hero is pushed or pulled or has a vendetta, wants to get revenge, wants to prove something, wants to save somebody. They're motivated by something, and that's usually brought on by the villain, right? So the villains in our lives can show us like where the growth needs to be, where we need to step up and like be our full selves, where we need to stop being afraid and holding ourselves back and push through to have these large changes, these, you know, whatever you want to, insert whatever, like save the person, save the town, save the city, grow and realize that they can be powerful and things like that. So the villain is kind of like, I see it as like this yin and yang energy of they can be a motivator. They can be the person that points that out for you. They can be the person that sets that example for you. And a lot of the time people try and talk about like the perspective of your trauma, and the people that have caused that trauma can be like our greatest teachers. Definitely I don't agree with the belief to like forgive your abuser or person who's caused you trauma, like not that far, but more so like this was a growth opportunity for me. This was a space that I learned under pressure, under survival, under whatever it is, and that could be years later that you learn it, but you learn that you're tough, you made it through it, you learned that you could stand up for yourself, that different things that you can learn from that. Like I always talk about um my mother and how my childhood was very traumatic, but now that I'm like learning and healing and working through this stuff for my own inner child so that they can feel safe and loved and supported, I see like when I look back that like it showed me how strong I was. It showed me like what I was meant to learn in this lifetime. I went through this more traumatic childhood because I was meant to be right here to share these things with you, right? Like I was strong enough to get through this. So definitely the villain can be a space of growth for us, like a mirror of growth, right? A mirror of motivation, a mirror of whatever you need. They can point out those things that inside of us we want to heal or that we didn't feel like we had. Um, and like I said, I'm not talking about like taking this literally and having you go out there and just be like really shitty to people. I'm just saying that this is an energy, right? A yin and yang. I see it as like an energy that we can embody for other people or for ourselves. So in terms of like viewing yourself as the villain, like how I did, I was like, oh my God, that word choice that I picked, using the term masses feels like so villain, like I'm taking over the world, right? Like the masses and stuff like that felt very like a negative connotation for me. But maybe that's like my natural, unique energy, right? Like not everybody responds like as a spiritual leader, as a witch leader, as a someone who works with people to help them heal, like any kind of shadow worker, spirit worker, like healer, whatever term you want to use. Like there's something for everyone. They always say, like, be you and you're going to attract your dream clients, your dream people. And that goes for everything, not just business people, right? And it's just the idea that, like, somebody might not resonate with this really soft and supportive and loving energy. And somebody might need that type of energy only for one aspect. And maybe for another aspect, they need motivating, like, stark, blunt, hard energy, fiery energy, like, really intense energy to like light the fire under their ass, or to like point out that they were sleeping on themselves and they really need to put, step their pussy up and like get into it, right? Like so this is just understanding that like not everybody is one fits into one category. Not everybody wants to learn from one category. Not everybody wants to like responds and reacts to one category. Like I like to think about like spirit guides, like what's the tone and the vibe that your spirit guides talk to you as. I have a client whose spirit guides are just like, no, you need to do this right now, like this is not how it is, like because they know that she's gonna react in that way, and like she hates it. She's like, why are they like this? But if they were like, hey sweetie, are you gonna do this thing, like she probably wouldn't listen to them. So it's just about understanding like your needs and what can motivate you, and understanding that everybody's different and people can respond differently to different things, and they might need for different areas of their life, different times in their life, different kind of support. and a different kind of energy. Um, and then the next thing that came up was a little bit like extending off of this is how we're all like this belief that we're all just mirrors for other people. And if we, like I talked about this before, if you recognize, beauty in somebody else or strength in someone else or whatever it is, that means that, you already have that within you, and it's kind of like mirroring that back to you. And sometimes like in order to dig deep and to understand the work that needs to be done, or the piece of us that needs to be amplified or tapped into, or where we were having our rose tinted glasses on or blocking ourselves, whatever it may be, we might need that kind of energy to trigger us, right? So I don't mean trigger, like I said, not in the like not going out and hurting people's feelings and like causing trauma and stuff, but more so like how I was saying, we don't always need soft, gentle, loving, supporting energy. Sometimes we need somebody that is brave enough and strong enough to say the hard thing, to say the thing that nobody was saying, that everybody was thinking, to be blunt with their opinions and their point of view. And like, this work isn't easy, it's going to be hard, but we're going to get through it, instead of like, oh, you'll be fine, it's going to be great, I'll support you. Like, those are two different types of people, and that's two different energies that you may or may not want to work with. And so sometimes we need somebody to like trigger us in order to snap us into this like mind frame. I know a lot of people post saying like, I only work with people that trigger me, because when you get triggered by something, we've talked about this before too, like your triggers are your treasures, right? They show you where there's room for growth, where the healing can be. So what we can be, maybe instead of thinking I need to be the most supportive, gentle, loving person, maybe like my personality, like what I'm meant to be in this earth, or for a certain amount of people, my ideal client or my friends and my family, whoever, is like somebody who triggers them, who like tells them like, yo, like this thing needs to be healed, this is a priority, and they're like, oh, like this is too much, because like I'm being faced to like get face my blocks, face my fears, face my resistance, right? When we feel triggered by someone, it's basically a resistance to it. And when we have resistance to something, that's like a huge like flag for us to know that that's where the healing is, that's where the work is. I wouldn't be feeling some type of way by this if I didn't have an emotional connection, a traumatic connection to whatever is going on. So being the villain, you can like be that person for somebody else. You can be that trigger that pushes them to work through their thing, to work with you, to work through their thing, to understand or to bring to light something that they were holding on to and they didn't acknowledge. So I really love like that point of view. And like real life examples, if it's not like business, it could be like twin flames. Like there's a misconception that twin flames are like the other half of your soul. There's a whole other podcast episode on that if you if you want to dive into that. But basically like your twin flame is the ultimate mirror for you. They're there to show you where your biggest areas of growth are. Any shitty situation that we go through, we always like, I always try to adopt the mentality of like, what can I learn from this, right? There's a reason I'm going through this, and I'm a 3/5 manifesting generator. And so as a line 3, that's the martyr. Like that's literally how I have to go through life, is I have to try it and experience it in order to come to the conclusion. So a huge part of my life is trying everything and not always succeeding, but either like just being okay with, if I failed, I still learned, and if I succeeded, I still learned. So it's like that each situation could be a trigger for us, could be a villain for us, might be feel shitty at the, during the time that it was happening, going through it, and even afterwards, but it can show us and teach us so many things. That's really what all life is. It's all mirrors. It's all helping us become better, and whether or not we want to look at it and listen to it and learn from it, that's our choice as humans, right? But that's kind of like the real life examples of what I'm talking about in terms of like villain energy. And sometimes like we can be that for other people without even knowing it. Like I've had people tell me like, I had to take a break from your account because you were just triggering me so much with all these like healing posts that you were, sharing about like healing your inner child and healing your trauma and your programming. Like that's a good indication for that person. Like that's where I'm having a lot of resistance and where I need to work on this. And I wasn't intending to be the villain, right? Like they didn't see it as a bad thing. I was just in this metaphor embracing the villain energy of just being myself and sharing what I thought was important and what I think my community on social media would benefit from. And that was like the villain energy that that person needed to show them like, whoa, this is a lot. Like I think I need to take some time and deal with this and work with this. So that I love that kind of like mentality of like, I can be me, I can be fully authentically me, and it might rub some people the wrong way, but it can also like help people and show people and be like that, like really strong pillar example of what life could be, what could be healed, what like all the positives that can come from sometimes being a triggering individual. And when you think about it, there might be people that come to mind that are triggering for you, or you have resistance to them, you don't like them because they irk you. There's usually some piece of that reasoning that it's something that you have yourself, or you were told when you were little that you hate now, and you just can't stand to look at it. Like that's where the healing is, sweetie, like um so I'm going to take a break, and then when I come back we're going to talk about the second half. Hello, I'm back. And there's actually one thing from the first part that I thought I mentioned, but I didn't because I jumped ahead and I got really excited about the hero villain yin and yang. So with the idea of the hero and the villain, we talked about how the villain can be the biggest motivator for the hero to step up to the plate. But the other thing that I heard from the Lemurian Quartz crystal was this idea that if we come to somebody as the hero, it kind of reminds me of like this real life thing of the bystander effect, which is basically like when somebody's being hurt in public, or you hear like somebody needs help, right? Um, and there's like more than one person there, that people will just like walk by as a bystander and be like, oh, there's tons of other people here, so one of these people will likely help that person, right? And so they just keep going on their way. And basically what happens is like this person is needing help and nobody ever helps them because everybody has the same thought of like, oh, one of those other people that's there will help. So this is kind of like what I was seeing when it was, if we approach somebody as a hero or like a guide, like a Gandalf wizard type of figure, or like a hero, like I'm a hero, they're going to be like, oh, good. Like somebody else is already doing the work and somebody else is already taking care of it. Right. So like, oh, that's good. Somebody else is finding healing. So they're going to help tons of people by finding healing. I don't need to do that. I don't need to step up to the plate. And so that kind of felt like that can happen if we're showing up as the hero all the time. But when you think about a villain, if a villain comes on the scene, like I just went, oh, something else popped into my head right now, and like the visual of like um any kind of comic book movie, or if you read comic books, you see like this pan out, this bystander effect kind of pan out. It's like, now that we have a hero like a Spider-Man or a Batman, I don't need to worry about it. They're always like, there's those, they do those like weird dimensions or whatever movies where it's like there's no Batman and everyone's like, who's gonna save us now? Like I can't do anything, I'm helpless without Batman. It's like kind of, it can turn into that kind of mentality of like there's only one hero that can do this. But if you appear as the villain is the motivator for the hero in most of these stories, right? So if you appear as a villain, you can motivate thousands of people to step up to the plate to destroy you, right? And that's in like the larger metaphor of this. But what it could mean is like if you show up as someone who is in their villain energy that is pointing out things that need to be fixed, or you're an opposer, a mirror, a trigger for somebody, then you can motivate them to like step up to the plate and become their own hero. Instead of approaching them as a hero, it's harder to motivate somebody else to be a hero when you're coming at them as a hero. Hopefully that makes sense, but that's kind of like the visual that I saw. And it just, I know that there's both ways, both can work. I'm not saying, oh, this is the only one. We're having a thought experiment. That's what this podcast is. I'm talking about intuitive downloads that come through, and what we can learn from them. So the second part of being and embracing villain energy, for me, is really fun. It's basically like when you think about villains in like comic books or superhero movies or things like that, like the biggest example, like I love Batman. That's my favorite like universe. I don't love Batman like the actual he's not like as the character, he's not my favorite superhero, but I love the Batman universe. It's my favorite. Like I love the villains in the Batman universe a lot. I'm actually, as you can tell, a villain person, right? Um so when this download came through, I was thinking like I immediately saw like this visual of like the Joker, right? And so the Joker, and we're not talking about like the weird new age Joker one, that like the solo movie, or like the Jared Leto one. Like I'm just talking about like the Heath Ledger Joker, the Jack Nicholson Joker, the comic book Joker, the animated series Joker, whichever version you identify with. Hopefully, just pick any villain from comic books or superhero movies that right? Um they they are so unequivocally and unapologetically themselves, right? They don't let anybody like stand in their way, tell them that they're not cool, tell them that they're not they're too much they're too like people will like literally try and kill them and put them in prison and all these things, and they just like stay their course. And I think that for a lot of like, that's why I was saying it's important in this episode to challenge your definition or perception of villains, because a lot of the metaphor that they say is like these people are crazy or they're unhinged or whatever. But I feel like it's kind of like that subtle like controlling like capitalistic like mission that we are fed throughout our lives, that it's like if you're unapologetically yourself and you stand out and you're not blending in and you're like you wear weird colors or your underwear on the outside of your pants or whatever the heck like villains do, right? Then like you're fucking crazy and there's something wrong with you and you deserve to be like hospitalized or whatever. And I think that that kind of narrative that we've seen in villain, like specifically comic book villain stories, it's not true, right? Like we've seen now in eh, more modern times, like I don't think this is the motivating reason why. But a lot of like the Disney villains, they're now getting their own live action movie where we are humanizing them. We're seeing the aspects of like what motivated them to become this evil figure, what motivated them to become this grandeur person, right? And so thinking about the villain more in that way, where it's like no matter how many times they are taken down and people hate them and people don't like them, like they still show up as fully authentically themselves and who they are. And in fact, they even like push it to the extreme of just being like the extreme version of themselves. And like I was saying, it's a little bit easier to show these examples with highly exaggerated people and characteristics. But I just kept seeing like the Joker and how it's like he wears weird stuff, like he does not look normal, like he like everything that he does is on brand for him, like his girlfriend, his goons, his car, his explosions, his heists, whatever he does, it's so on brand. Like he's 100% him. He creates his universe and his world and the things that he is passionate about fully based off of himself and what world he wants to see. And yes, of course, it's at odds with what is best for society, excuse me, and like all these other types of things. But it's just showing you like, I was really thinking about this when this download came in, and like that common saying where it's like you either die the hero or live long enough to see yourself become the villain. And I think that looking at it from a different angle, this like saying, it kind of coincides with what I was just talking about. Like if you live long enough, like in real life, like if you live to be 100 years old, like you lived long enough to become the villain, it's because you've lived through so much shit and so many lies and so much like attempts of people to program you and fit you in a box, that you're just like, I'm tired of doing that. I'm tired of trying to be everybody's hero, to be what everybody else wants me to be. I'm going to be fully me. And that is portrayed as like the villain, right? Like now I'm this evil, like crotchety old person who's like, get away from me. I don't want to deal with your nonsense. Nancy. Like, I don't know who Nancy is. But it's just like, I think that that saying can be looked at from a different way, where it's like, I spent my whole life being the hero, healing myself, and like creating a space to support myself, and maybe like dying on swords for other people and doing what other people wanted. And now it's like, I'm too old for that shit, so I'm going to be the villain. I'm going to be selfish and be who I am and do what I want. And selfish doesn't need to be bad. Like, if I say selfish and it triggers you, that's like, that's something to think about. Like, what is your definition of selfish, right? And so like, I think that this, like, looking at this saying from that way, it kind of makes sense, where it's like, these villains, they had so usually they have like really intense background stories, and so do usually the heroes. But they're like, I'm just gonna be fully me. I'm gonna be weird as fuck. Like, I'm gonna be out here and do whatever I want. And the other thing that I really admire about these villains, and like the energy that we can like take from them, is like how much they believe in themselves too, right? Not only are they being authentically them, not like letting anything get in their way, like taking their everything to the extreme in terms of like their life, what they surround themselves with, how they talk, how they dress, everything like that. But then there's also like the other part of it is, they don't let anybody like tell them otherwise. They are just, they believe fully in themselves and their heist and their like whatever mission or thing that they want to do, regardless of all the like realistic times that they've failed. So it's like, when you think about the Joker, he's always trying to like cause some fucking chaos, right? Like blow up the city, kill people, whatever, like kill Batman, whatever it is. And it's like, every single time, for the most part, Batman always wins. He always gets stopped. He always gets put in jail or in Arkham Asylum, right? And that, no matter how many times he has been like, he has failed, he has been like disheartened, or his plan has been foiled, he just comes back with the same gusto and energy for his next thing that he's planning. And he believes like, I'm gonna win every single time. And I think that that kind of energy is really like admire, like is really something to be admired. Like, instead of thinking it as like, oh, he's just crazy and like he just doesn't understand, like obviously the things that he's doing I don't condone, right? But like, this idea that if you fully believe in yourself and you get up every time you fall down, and you believe that you're going to succeed and what you're doing is completely right and what and is best for you, like, if you live through your life like with that kind of main character energy, you'd be freaking unstoppable, right? Like, nobody could tell you otherwise. You would fully believe in what your intuition is telling you and yourself, and believe in your capabilities, and just keep going no matter what. Even if you failed, you know that you're going to make it this next time, if not the next time, if not the next time, because it doesn't matter about how many times you have to do it. It just matters that you succeed and you get to do the thing that you set out to do, instead of stopping yourself and never doing it. And I think that that kind of energy is really potent and really powerful to take with you in your life. Like, if we can do one of those things, to adopt that much faith in yourself, to adopt the principle that no matter how many times I fail, I'm going to keep getting up and I'm going to keep fighting towards my goal or my vision, right? Like, they usually have like some big grand like vision of the world and what they want their city to look like or whatever, right? Like, and I think that that is important too, like having a vision for yourself and for what you want your life to look like. Or if you're a business owner or a healer, like what you want the world to look like with your business changing things. Like, I think that having that kind of attitude and that gusto is like really, like, I'm awe-inspiring, right? When you really look at it, like, despite what he's trying to accomplish and how he accomplishes it, like, he's cooking up elaborate things, he's calling in other villains for help, he's creating community and collaboration, and he's thinking out of the box, and he's doing all these like really intense things. And it's like, it doesn't matter, because all he cares about is achieving his goal or being happy or whatever it is that he wants, right? And that is the cool part. Like, if we like adopt that for our life, like asking ourselves, like, truly, what do I want? What is my goal? What is my vision for the world? And just like stopping at nothing to do that, then like there would be so much positive change in the world. you know, and like I said, not the negative stuff. Like I'm not condoning like going out and murdering people and all these types of things. But like most of you like probably don't have that kind of like thought when I'm bringing up these things. But it's like maybe you want to just be really successful. Maybe you just want to be really truly happy in your body. Maybe you want to help other people find safety. Like if you just stopped at nothing to do that and you fully believed in yourself, no matter what obstacle came in your way, then we would all be super successful, right? Like because most people like they never start or they give up, and that's why these things never change in their life. um and so it's just like taking and embodying like ways that we can embody that villain energy to like be our best self, to like to be who we actually are and to be authentic. So what I want for this episode and for you is to like kind of challenge yourself. So in the beginning I talked about like thinking about your like ways that you have learned over time that people have told you to stop being who you were. Like think about a time when you were a kid and you did something and people were like, don't do that. Think about like how for me, like how I was saying, like people would always tell me I talk too much in class. Like I got in trouble all the time for that. People would tell me I was intimidating because like I used to just like I was the person that was like, I'm tired. I'm not going to wait for boys to ask me out. I'm just going to tell them that I like them and ask them if they want to go out with me. Like at a certain point in my life, I had some traumatic thing happen with some boy that I liked, and he was going to like move away. And I was like, if I never tell him, he'll never know. And so then after that, I was like, oh, this isn't that bad. Like this rejection isn't that bad. So I just was like, okay, I'm just gonna be fully myself. And I hate like waiting, like, oh my God, does he like me? Did he look at me? I hate that. I hate like being in my head about that stuff. So I just like will tell people like, and that's something I do all the time now. I'm like straight up, like, yo, what's wrong? I'm getting bad vibes. Like, hey, is everything okay? Like, I feel like you've been avoiding me, or it's like, hey, I like you. Do you want to go out with me? You know, like, so it's like, what are ways that we learn that we shouldn't be this way, or we were told we're too much or too little or too whatever, or not enough of whatever, that we like have like either consciously or subconsciously seeped into our framework for ourselves, right? Like I was just sitting there and I was like, oh, this word choice is bad. Like who the fuck told me that? Like who told me that it's bad to use this word choice, that I can't be the fucking super villain of my dreams, that I can't see the world that way and feel like that? Honestly, like embodying like villain energy feels way more exciting and empowering to me than embodying hero energy, right? And I love to be like anti on trend and stuff, so like the fact that villains aren't popular like makes it better for me. And like I'm just like, not everybody wants to be this, so I'm cool with that, right? So thinking about ways, like take some time to journal and think about ways that you've been told, and this could be societally, culturally, or just like specifically to your life and your experiences, like more like small scale, right, with people and things like that. And then think about like, what are your connotations with villains, or like whatever, you know, word you want to supplement in there if you do believe in evil and things like that. Like what are definitions that you have, and how can you change it to help it be empowering for you? And then how can you just like show up more authentically? Like if you were to be less of this or more of this, like is it scary? Maybe do it a little by little. Like for me, I would do I really wanted to just like be out in nature, but I was scared to look weird, right? Like I was scared to be out in my neighborhood like sitting down meditating or like doing yoga, or I was even scared to take up space, right? And I think that with this villain energy, it shows us it's okay, like take up all the fucking space. Like they take other people's space, like they take other people's lives, right? Like they don't give a fuck. They're just like, I'm gonna take up as much space as I want to, be as loud as I want to, be as disruptive as I want to, and it's because it makes me happy. And so it's like they're a great example of taking up space that like you naturally, you get that space, you deserve that space, like you own that space. And so like I was afraid to even take up space by like playing like meditation music out loud in my neighborhood. And it's like there's fucking people like who bring their fucking mini speakers to the theme park. Like that kind of taking up space is just like the audacity for me. Like I'm just like, really? You're here right now doing this? Seriously? Like there's already music playing at the theme park. Like why do you need to bring your own music? But it's like that's the kind of main character energy. And like that's why I had that response. Like you just heard like how I was like, seriously? Like that's a trigger. Like that's me getting triggered because it's like I wish I could take up that space and not feel so self-conscious about it. And so when people take up space, I'm just like, really? You really have to take up space right now, you know? So it's like looking at those things in your life that are like really triggering for you. And like triggers don't have to be that intense. It could just be I have a strong reaction. That's a trigger, right? Like you saw how I was like, seriously? Like anything where you feel like strongly about something, you have an opinion about a way that somebody is, that's a trigger for you. That's like some place where you can illuminate like why why do I get mad when this person does it? It's usually because like we wish we could do it. We wish we could be that and we can't. So we get like so bothered by seeing it put like it's basically being thrown in our face. So looking at ways that that kind of stuff has happened to you or is currently happening to you in your life and like addressing them. So like going back to the original thing, like I was afraid to do that in my neighborhood and then I slowly started doing it and I found that like for the most part like people don't give a fuck. They just keep walking. And like the people that I do know, they're just like, oh hey, I saw you like meditating or whatever. It's like cool, yeah, like whatever. Like I dance when I walk my dog now because I want to move my body, and it's like who cares if I look weird while I'm walking and dancing? And it's like maybe it gives other people permission. Like that's this idea of the villain energy, right? I'm showing people like it's okay, I can be exactly who I want to be, and I don't care about other people. That's like my personal thing that I need to work on, right? So thinking about those things for yourself and what maybe comes to mind, or start journaling and see what comes through. And then working on like putting on your villain persona. Maybe you create like an alter ego or something that makes it a little easier to separate like it's too scary for me to do this right now. So like my alter ego can do that though, right? So it's like a space to slip in and out of, an energy to slip in and out of. And you don't have to do this for everything in your life. It could just be, like I said, areas where you need that support, where you need that energy. Or maybe you just like want to be a full-on villain. Like I kind of feel like that. So I'm like, maybe I'm the villain. Am I the drama? Am I the drama? It's me. I'm the drama. um, so that is definitely going to be like a huge thing. And just asking yourself, like, after you've done all that other work, like, where the fear is around that, right? That's what we do in shadow work. Where's the fear? How can I like remove this? How can I empower myself through this? And like the last thing that I would challenge you to do is to think about like what or who you are as your authentic self. So if you miss a piece of you that used to be this way and you've since like disconnected from it, or like in my example, you find yourself like thinking a certain way in your head and embodying a certain energy in your head, and then you automatically erase that. Like I'm not even allowing myself to express out loud who I truly am before I'm censoring myself, right? So we want to start to take apart those layers, and this is a process, right? So how I was talking about in the beginning, it takes smaller steps to get the bigger change. So it's okay if it feels like it's not working, if it feels like you're regressing. It's just about staying committed to it and keeping the work through it, making sure that having the intention behind it. So for me, I'll still sometimes say certain things or do certain things that I'm working on, but then afterwards, like literally right after, I'll be like, oh, I need to correct myself, my thinking. Oh, I need to, like, so it's okay if it's a little bit of that in the beginning. And if it's hard in the beginning, try small baby steps. So like I did baby steps, like I would go outside and be in, in the grass, like meditating for 5 minutes, or do yoga for 5 minutes, do like 2 stretches or something, and then now I just like don't give a fuck. So like taking those smaller steps to be yourself, and pick something that is not as intense. Like for me, like the example that I'm using is like going out and meditating on my walk, with my dog. That's not super intense, not super high risk. Like if I chicken out at any time, I can just keep walking or go home. So pick something that isn't as like crazy at first, because that will feel easier for you to work through, at least like when your nervous system and when your body might be getting triggered or having some trauma arise around this, you don't want to pick something that's like really like, I'm just going to go and like quit my job. Like, because I've always wanted to do this thing. Like, if that's how you're feeling, do you, but like, don't force yourself to do that. Do what feels like attainable. Like, it's not going to feel comfortable. It's not going to feel like, oh yeah, it can still feel scary, but like maybe the least scary, or okay, like I only have to do this for a minute and then I'm done. You know, like pick something like that that you can work with yourself and it can be a process, right? Like we see with all these villain stories, over time they became the villain. So over time you're gonna become the villain. I want to make like a TikTok soundbite that's like, am I the villain? Is it me? Just for this episode, like that's the theme for this episode. So, or maybe like if you create your alter ego, like asking yourself, what would my alter ego do in this situation? And then doing that, right? So there's tons of ways that you can make this work for yourself. Or even if there's like, you don't want to have an alter ego, like if there's a villain or a person that you're like, ooh, I wish I was like them. They're just so unapologetically them. They're so whatever, like inspires you, like insert here what inspires you. Like think about that. Like they have those like the fucking religious, like what would Jesus do, like that saying, like that's somebody they look up to, that's somebody they like honor and appreciate. And so they, instead of like thinking of what would my human person, me as a human do, they think like what would Jesus do because I look up to him. So it's like maybe creating your own what would Jesus do like thing, where it's like what would the Joker do, right? What would Joker do? It's the same thing. Instead of Jesus, it's Joker. But yeah, like it could be, it doesn't have to be a villain, but I think like just talking about it in terms of like people see that as the villain, like being yourself, being unapologetic, being authentic, being loud, being like whatever it is usually villainized. Like I said, it's usually, oh, you're crazy, oh, you're this, oh, you're too much, oh, you're like, you're a nasty woman, like all these things, right? So taking back those negative terms is kind of like the bigger metaphor that I'm saying, taking back those demonized or ostracized negative terms and aspects of yourself and who you are, and reclaiming those in power, in the name of power, in the name of like authenticity. So if there is somebody, like lots of people love Beyonce, like she just out here being Beyonce. So it's like, what would Beyonce do? Embody that kind of energy. So I'm really excited to see all this new change within you. And I'm really just want to say like, this can be hard. So I support you and I see you and you're doing great, sweetie. And just all the things like, so if you want to reach out, tell me how it went, tell me how you found this episode, if it resonated with you, or comments on our social media. I would love to hear all of that. And again, if you want to become a patron or if you have ideas for what you would want to see in our Patreon community, I would greatly appreciate that. And until next time, bye. If you love Witchy and Weird podcasts, support us by donating monthly for as little as 99 cents at anchor.fm/witchyandweird/support. You can cancel at any time and 100% of the proceeds go directly to the pod. Or, if you don't want to commit to a monthly donation, buy Amanda a coffee at ko-fi.com/wishyandweird to help fuel them while they record, edit, create, and upload content for the podcast. And if you're feeling extra generous, leave us a review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify and tell your witchy and weird friends about us too. Bye!